Sometimes I lay alone at night, pondering the great mysteries of our world. What is at the edge of our universe? Whatever happened to Amelia Earhart on that day? How in the hell is it still springtime in the 100 Girlfriends manga? When I decided I was going to make some side content during break weeks, this was one of the first ideas I had, even though I knew it would cost me my sanity. But when a member of the Scanlation team mentioned in the 100 Girlfriends Discord that they thought about doing it themselves, it shot right at my to-do list. And now, here we are. If you've been following the 100 Girlfriends manga and are up to date on it, you are pretty aware that the concept of time is an enigma in this series. On the surface level of this iceberg, we are left with the current dilemma. We are 181 chapters into the series with 29 girlfriends in tow, and somehow, it's still spring. Hell, even the writer has acknowledged in the series itself the inconsistency of the passage of time. But that's not good enough for me. I want to know for sure just how much time has actually passed in this series so far. So I reread the entirety of the series again from beginning to the current chapter and counted every single passage of time and kept record on a spreadsheet. Yes, I busted out the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet for this, and this is the conclusion I came to. First, a starting point. Before we even get to chapter 1, let's go over the Japanese educational system. In Japan, the school year begins in April and is broken into 3 trimesters. The first one running from the beginning of April to about July 20th, before they go on summer vacation. Now, before you get to me in the comments, this isn't true for every school. There are some variations, but generally this is how it's scheduled for a lot of schools in Japan. So the fact that Rentaro has started the new school year and hasn't gone on summer vacation yet means we're somewhere between April 1st and July 20th, supposedly. Now granted, every school has a different starting date, and most websites just list it as beginning of April for the beginning of the school year, so we'll just start with April 1st just to keep things simple, and give this series as much time as possible to redeem itself. We will acknowledge all passages of time either spoken or shown in the art, or said by this little narrator box. And if there is no clear showing of passage of time in the chapter itself, we will count that chapter as only one day. I'm sure there will be times I'll have to make exceptions or fill in the blanks myself, but let's burn that bridge when we get there. I won't go over every chapter one by one, as this video would probably end up being multiple hours long, but I will be going over the biggest passages of time in each volume to show you who the biggest offender of each volume is. Now that we've set our ground rules, let's get started. Who needs brain cells anyway? Oh yeah, and spoilers ahead for every volume, by the way. Starting where it all began in Volume 1, Chapter 1, we're going to first ignore the day that Rentaro graduated and his talk with anonymous friend A, and his talk with the love god at the shrine. I think a good reference starting point for this calculation should be the first day of school, that being our set date of April 1st. So any kind of flashbacks that characters have before the first day of the school year will not be counted. Granted, outside of these character flashbacks, this rule won't be coming up too often. Now, on to the rest of Volume 1. Volume 1 is one of the few instances where they give us some exact numbers. In Chapter 3, during Shizuka's introduction, we see clearly here on the pages showing going from one day to the next, with Rentaro reading the book and returning it to Shizuka saying he read it all last night, implying only one night has passed. Then in the montage of Shizuka waiting for Rentaro to return the book, an additional 3 more days goes by. Then at the very end of the chapter, we see a cut to the next day when Rentaro introduces Shizuka to Hikari and Karane, meaning Chapter 3 is our biggest contributor here to the count with 6 days total passed. Totaling that with the other chapters of this volume that I'll show on screen here, we're currently at 9 days passed at the end of Volume 1. Also, if you are curious, there are some chapters where no extra days passed. Volume 1 here is a good example. After the introduction day of Shizuka at the end of Chapter 3, the following 2 chapters take place in a single day, so when it clearly shows that we are on a continuing day from a previous chapter, I count those as 0 days. Still with me? It only gets worse from here. Volume 2's biggest offender is Chapter 7, the date with Nano. You're probably thinking to yourself, wait, Moonlight, the date was only at 1 day at the amusement park. How did you get to 5? Funny you should ask, because of this annoying little box right here. After Rentaro gets Nano to agree to the date, we get this little brat of a box having the gall to say a few days later. So, thank you for that, 100 Girlfriends. We're only on Chapter 7 and you're already giving me a hard time keeping an exact amount. So, how much is a view? Hold on to that thought because we have a bigger problem very soon that will make us circle back on that question. But given my early analysis, I settled on the 2 days we see in the chapter plus a few to come out to 5. Add that with the rest of the volume, and we come out to 12 days total for Volume 2. Next up, Volume 3, one of the easiest volumes by far. And if you're familiar with the series as I am, you know why. Almost the entirety of Volume 3 takes place over a single night at the Hanazono mansion, as Rentaro and the gang try to free Hikari from her controlling mother, only to have the mother join the group and they spend the night having a sleepover. This combined 2-day adventure, plus the body swap chapter at the end of the volume, leaves Volume 3 as our lowest so far with only 3 days passed. You know, at this rate, maybe we've all been a little too hard on this manga and its passage of time. Maybe it's not as bad as we were all speculating. Picking up the pace in Volume 4, we seem to be picking up somewhat of a pattern. Most chapters being 1 to 2 day adventures, with one chapter being the standout with being longer. In Volume 4, that's the introduction of the food eating contest in Chapter 25. While the actual contest itself is a single day, as shown by the following 2 chapters having zeros on them, what makes the introduction to the food eating contest a 10 is this single line right here, where Rentaro says, "next Sunday." And this is where speculation starts to come in. If you were to say next Sunday, it's obviously not this Sunday, so at minimum we are to assume the day that they are currently on is a Friday because they are still in school. Next Sunday would be 10 days away, and for these kinds of speculations we'll be going with the minimum possibility here just to give this series a fighting chance of still being in spring. With this extra week in Chapter 25 as well as the others of this volume, Volume 4 comes out to 17 days total. Volume 5 continues the pattern we have established with not too many days passing except for one standout. This volume's culprit being Chapter 35, but thankfully it's pretty straightforward as to why. Right at the top of the chapter, Rentaro mentions that they have been practicing for the baseball game for 2 weeks. So counting those 2 weeks of training, plus the day of the game itself, we have 15 days total. Our new record for a single chapter. Surely it shouldn't get any worse than that in a single chapter, right? Right? Thankfully, it slightly makes up for it by having a 0 day as the baseball game arc wrapped up in a single day. Adding in the remainder of the volume, for Volume 5 we have a total of 24 days, almost an entire month in a single volume because we spent half of it in a baseball arc. Thankfully, we take it easy with Volume 6. Almost all of them are singular day chapters, with the only standout being Chapter 45, as the only 2-dayer from the arc of introducing Meme. This volume even gives us the gift of another 0-dayer, as the Tsundere Lost trilogy was 3 chapters but only 2 days. While not as laid back as Volume 6, Volume 7 does slam us with another week to the counter. In Chapter 54, we are introduced to my new mortal enemy, the narrator box that says, "Some days later." This little bugger appears quite a number of times throughout the series, and is my biggest headache. Some is a very ambiguous word and means a different number in the context that varies from person to person. But I think to most people it's more than a few, but smaller than several. So we're looking at roughly about 4 to 6 here. So to give this a conservative estimate and give this series a chance to prove itself as still in spring, in situations like these we're going to give it the smallest number possible. So when it says some, we're going to hit it with what we call sum tax. So adding the sum tax along with the 3 visible days we see on camera, making this a 7-day total. A full week based on Shio banning everyone from kissing. How about that? Adding the remaining 1s and 2s from the rest of the chapters in this volume, we come out to 18 days in Volume 7. Keeping track at home? Volume 8 is a lot like Volume 7. We get another week given to us by Chapter 62, which is the first half of the first idol arc. With this one, we only have to pay close attention to the wording. Right at the top of the chapter, as Ahari gets a call letting her know about the previous idol group needing to cancel, thankfully the narrator is on our side this time, saying that the festival is 1 week away. Okay, I know it actually says about 1 week away, but at this point I'm just like... So we don't even need to carefully go through this chapter because we know everything happens in the week leading up to the festival. Thankfully I noticed this because I thought I was going to have to count this montage as an extra day, or possibly all different days. But no, we just need to count this all as the 1 week, plus the day at the top of the chapter, making this chapter an 8-dayer. Everything else in this volume is about 1 to 2, and we even get another gifted 0-dayer from the Sea Otter sleepover, making Volume 8 a total of 17 days past. So with Volume 9, this was one of the ones I was dreading. No lie, the night I decided to make this video, I got into bed and immediately had a Squidward moment remembering a certain chapter and how much it might impact these numbers. And this volume has that chapter. Chapter 73, titled May I Trouble You for a Love Story, sees the girlfriends being interviewed by a local news station for love stories. And the chapter proceeds with each girlfriend telling a different story of a different date they had with Rentaro. And you know what that means? Since none of these dates have been visible in other chapters, every single one of these mentions of a date with Rentaro needs to be counted as a single day. At this point in the story, we have 15 girlfriends, and each one shares a story with no show of overlap. Counting all 15 of their stories, plus the day of the chapter itself, we are given 16 days accounted for, beating the previous record of 15 days from the baseball training arc. Combine that with the remaining chapters of Volume 9, which again was mostly 1 and 2s, but this one had the audacity to give a peculiar 3-dayer in chapters 69 and 71, making our new high score volume of 28 total in Volume 9. Getting into double digits with Volume 10, nothing quite out of the ordinary at least, compared to what we just went through in Volume 9. The highest count in Volume 10 is Chapter 83, which was the Ramen Challenge chapter, explicitly told to us that each encounter with a duo of girlfriends were on different days. 9 groups of 2 equals 9 days. Nice and simple calculations. Add the remaining chapters of this volume, which again is a bunch of 1s and 2s, and we get ourselves a total of 19. Can the rest of the calculations be this easy, please? Well, just maybe, as Volume 11 takes things easy again in this regard, the highest being Chapter 89, where we see Mei and Iku go to training camp to better themselves. This takes place over a weekend. While the actual training itself took place over 2 days, the mystery here is at the beginning where Iku invites Mei to the training. Iku just mentions this weekend, so clearly this takes place during the school week, but we have no reference to when in the week or how far away the weekend is. At most, if this was on a Monday, we're talking about adding 5 days to the counter, where if it was a last minute thing and she invited her on a Friday, then we're only adding 1 extra day to the count alongside the weekend. But at the current numbers we are currently at, this is just a drop in the bucket. So I say we split right down the middle and say Iku invited Mei on a Wednesday, adding 3 days going to the weekend, making this chapter a total of 5 days. Adding in the rest of the chapters of the volume, and we are left with a nice and small 18-day adage. And I only say small because it is compared to some of the other volumes we have done so far. Volume 12 took it easy on us. The Sports Festival arc took care of a couple chapters as they all took place on a single day, giving us some 0-day chapters. The only other outlier being Chapter 103, which is only just another 2-dayer. Adding all these 0s and 1s and a couple 2s left us with a measly 9 days to the counter. Thank you, Sports Festival arc. Things pick up again, but not by much in Volume 13. The biggest contributor being near the end of the volume in Chapter 112, Mimimi is a beautiful heroine. Unfortunately, we do have to get a bit creative here. First off, we get the return of my arch nemesis some days later, but even after that, we get this time jump with no mention of how much time has passed. Mimimi chooses to do the play again, but then it cuts to just the day before the play, and nowhere in the chapter is it mentioned how long she has been at this. So we have nothing to work on, unlike the idle chapter. So with no mention of any time passage whatsoever, we just have to assume that after the some days later, all of these days are back to back. Then looking at the chapter entirely, we have the 1 day at the beginning, the some days tax of 4 more days, the day before the play, and the day of the play itself, and the day after the play at the end of the chapter, leading to a total of 8. Chapter 105 in this volume kind of follows suits from Chapter 89, where Kishka, Rentaro, and Yako go on a date, and our only indication of time passing is Sunday. Assuming it's within the same week, but with no clue how far into the school week they are, so like with Chapter 89, we're just going to assume it's right in the middle on Wednesday. Adding in the remaining chapters, Volume 13 gives us a total of 19 to the sum. With only a few weird bumps in the calculations, it's been smooth sailing for the past couple volumes. Hopefully this trend continues for the remainder of— God damn it. We're back to the high numbers in a volume, this time thanks to Chapter 120, and that's because of a little ditty we call Rentaro's Daily Life chapters. I'm sure a lot of you were waiting for these to come into play. And even though a majority of these are just snippets of a day, there is no connection to these to any other previous chapter events, so we have to count these as all separate days. There are 12 stories here, so this automatically becomes a 12-dayer of a chapter. Actually, it's 13 because in Paddler Catcher Battery, we see a flashback of Mei practicing her swinging, so 2 days are shown in this single snippet. And the worst part? We're currently at 5 daily chapters at the time of this writing in the series, so it's only going to get worse from here on out. Adding the remainder of Volume 14, which is just a bunch of 1s and 2s again, we leave this volume with 21 in total days. Moving on to Volume 15, and it's only getting worse. Chapter 130 hits us with a total of 17 days in Daily Life Part 2, even more than the last one. And I'm not even counting the small snippet at the beginning of them announcing Season 1 of the anime. That easily could have been another day, but I decided to be forgiving. And this is how they repay me. Not only is this a bunch of small stories that we must count, but numerous of them, like the Dynamite Deviant duo Daring's Dreams and Sue's Number Love Talk, show clear next day events. So not only are they short, but they are counting for multiple days. And even worse, Nit Meme Nit Nano has you. Once again, we are hit with the some days later, and this is in a daily life snippet. That's it. I'm getting to the bottom of this. We're gonna find some definitive answers on this. So I decided to go straight to the source. And by source, I don't mean the authors themselves, but the next best thing, the team working on the fan scanlations. I won't show our whole conversation, but I'll paraphrase their answers. I showed them the examples of the some days that is present throughout the manga, and asked them if maybe the original Japanese wording could give us a hint to a possibly closer time frame. Their response was that the writing of the Japanese is about as vague as ours. When directly translated, the phrase comes out to as a number of days, a few days, several days, some days, etc. It was a long shot that maybe culturally they used a word that may or may not have had a smaller time frame. So after all that, looks like we're right back to where we started. A vague 4 to 6 time frame whenever some days later pops up. And to be generous, we'll only hit them with 4 instead of 6. Where were we before I got sidetracked? Oh yeah, volume 15, and its massive 17 days on Daily Life Part 2. Thankfully, the rest of the volume doesn't have much left in that regard. The previous chapter before that does have an outlier being a 3-dayer instead of the usual 1 or 2. But because of that Daily Life chapter, volume 15 is still huge, coming in at 32 days total. I think that's our new record. Thankfully, we can relax just a tiny bit in volume 16, as there isn't another Daily Life chapter. Hell, it's even a bunch of 1 days and even a 0-dayer in the mix here, with only a 2-dayer at the end being the highest. We do have to take a little leeway in chapter 140 due to no time frame being given from the first day with Yaku to the second, just in this blurb of dialogue from Kusuri saying that the Antique Roadshow would be in town soon. I don't know what's worse, this or the some days later. We're just gonna have to forfeit to the unknown on this one and only count the 2 visible days since it gives us nothing else to work with. Picking back up only slightly in volume 17, the biggest chapter going to chapter 144. In the Inda family secret, we have our dreaded some days later, yet again, in between the chat on the roof and a date with Rentaro and Karane. Thankfully, the rest of the day takes place in a single day and night, which leads to the rest of the trilogy of chapters only taking place over a single day, making 146 another rare 0. An honorable mention does need to go to 147, immediately following through being a 4-dayer of Tama trying to get a part-time job. Oh wait, sorry, part-time job. Clearly giving us things such as the next day. I guess occasionally they do throw us a bone, or in this case, catnip. Adding these all for volume 17 gives us 15 more days on the count. Anyone else keep tracking home before I reveal the answer at the end? It's about to get a little wild because, slight spoiler alert, this is going to be the end of the small number volumes. Volume 18 decided not to only hit us with another daily life montage chapter, but 2 other chapters that take up more than a week by themselves. Chapter 152, the second idol installment. Though we do have to pay attention to the details here. The narrator mentions some 2 weeks, but we're just going to ignore the some part of that so I don't blow another blood vessel, and just say it's 2 weeks before the festival. But then Hahari gets the call that the festival needs to be moved up a week due to a typhoon, so much like the previous idol chapter, we are given a time frame. Everything from this point forward until the festival happens within that week, making the extra training session chapter of 153 a 0-dayer. So counting the week leading up to the festival over the events of chapter 153, and the day at the beginning of the chapter where they are told to do the event again, chapter 152 accumulates 8 days total. Chapter 158 with Himika and Uto was a weird one for me to try to calculate. Or I guess abnormal would be a better word to use. I originally titled this up as another 8-dayer as I considered every image in this montage as a different day. But while going over it again while writing this script, I had another thought. It's possible all these events took place over a single day, or maybe 2 days as we see nighttime in this one. And then I noticed something else. Both Himika and Uto are in their school uniforms the entire time, and we know this series loves to put these characters in other outfits when they aren't at school. So my new thought is this montage takes place over 2 days, and they did it after school. So this chapter went from an 8-dayer to a 4-dayer after we count the montage as 2 days, plus the 2 days from the beginning and the end of the chapter. Lastly for this volume, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, Daily Life Part 3. This one coming in at 13 days even though there is only 11 short stories, because 2 of them had the gall to show the passage of time to the following day, with both Momoha and Tama sleeping in the former's tent, and Karane and Rin spending the time at the arcade, only to go back to the roof the following day. Another massive daily life chapter, plus the other two big ones we mentioned, and the other chapters of this volume ends up with 30 days passed in volume 18. A whole month for one volume. Getting near the end here with volume 19, it's thankfully on the easier side, except for the reoccurring daily life chapters that we seem to get every volume now. Thankfully, unlike some of the past ones, all the stories in this one are straightforward single-day events, though it still doesn't help that it's still 10 stories equaling 10 days. And the rest of the volume is easily a bunch of 1s and 2s again, making volume 19 one of our smallest in a while. Maybe the author has calmed down on the passage of time with volume 20?
No.
Oh boy, volume 20. So remember back in volume 9 with the Love Story Collection chapter? Well, it's back with a vengeance. Chapter 168 with the introduction of channel favorite Shina Usami gives us another one of these scenarios, with the Rentaro Snapshot Swap Party. Much like the Love Story chapter, we get glimpses into dates that are unaccounted for from the rest of the manga, so we have to count each and every one of these snapshots as a different day, because they happened. We just didn't see them. And because each girlfriend, including Sheena, who wasn't even an official girlfriend at the time, had a picture to share, that's 28 days unaccounted for. Plus the day of the chapter itself, totaling 29 days in this single chapter alone. A new record for the whole series so far. Why is it so poetic that the chapter that started me doing these reviews also holds the record for causing the biggest jump in time? But volume 20 is just the volume that keeps on giving because we aren't done yet with counting some big chapters. Chapter 174, another Usa-chan focused chapter, we see our old enemy some days later, return once again adding on the some tax, as well as a couple days shown off with Usa-chan being with Rentaro or Mimimi, adding a whole week to the count. And we couldn't go by this volume without another Daily Life installment. Daily Life 5 here adds another 12 days to the counter. But at this point I'm clearly just being petty, because it's very clear in part 5 that a lot of these are happening right on top of each other in the same day as I said in my review, but we're still going to count them as each individual story as its own just in case. At this rate, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference in the calculations. With that massive chapter 168 and a daily life and a week of Usa-chan, the winner of the most days in a single volume goes to volume 20 with a total of 55 days counted.
That's quite big. Impressive.
Lastly, in the current volume we are in, that is volume 21, we only have 6 chapters to work with so far as of the recording of this video. Chapter 182 was just recently released by the Scanlation teams, so that's all we got to go on so far. And even though we're only working with about half a volume, volume 21 is no slouch either. While the introduction of Meru was some nice and simple singular days, we get the newly evolved form of the daily life chapters in the form of daily life with his girlfriends. And much like the Snapshot Party, every single girlfriend has a scene. Because we have 29 girlfriends right now, that is 29 days accounted for across 2 chapters. 15 in chapter 180 and 14 in chapter 181. Leaving us with volume 21 at only half complete at already 32 days past. And here's just the last minute edit. Making this video took longer than I thought, and the scans for 182 are out. I won't go into any detail here of the chapter because spoilers, but counting the days in this chapter is a little tough to nail down. But I'm going to go with what seems to be 4 days in this chapter. So let's just throw another 4 on top of the count because why not? Whew, we made it to the end. How are you all holding up? Grab a drink and your calculator because now it's time to add it all up. I'm not going to repeat all those numbers again, so boom! There is my listings from my spreadsheet keeping track of every volume and how many days each one had. And here it is listing from most to least, showing volume 20 and its massive 55 all the way down to the smallest being volume 3 with only 3 days. Now adding all those together, we get, drum roll please, 421 days, over a whole year's worth of days. Rentaro should be in his 2nd year by now. Kisuka and Kusuri should be graduated, a bunch of the middle school girlfriends should be 1st years now. We're way past needing to be in summer. We need to be in the following school year. It's actually quite insane how quickly that added up. But we're not done yet. As I mentioned before, it's really the daily life chapters and instances of not shown dates like the Snapshot Party that really drives this number up. So to give this series the best possible chance at being accurate, let's assume Rentaro really is the Chad that we give him credit for, and say a lot of these dates and other short instances we see in the manga happen sometimes on the same day. Though it may or may not be canon, it is relevant that one of the light novel stories has him doing this, where he has multiple dates going on the same day. So for my new calculation, we're just going to ignore every daily life chapter, the flirty days with girlfriends chapters, the dates we see pictures of in the snapshot party, and the dates we are told of in the love story interview. And just assume they all conglomerate sometimes on the same day, cutting this drastically. We're not going to be working with exact numbers, but these will be rough estimates. So only counting the physical days we see or hear about in the series, the new total comes out to 282. Ticking out all these individual segments and casual mentions of other days brings us down by almost half. 282 days puts us into early January, so at least we are still within the same school year. So no matter how you slice it and give Rentaro the benefit of the doubt of stacking multiple dates into a single day, there is just no way for this series to still be in spring. At minimum, given the days shown on the page and or mentioned, it should be about winter, around Christmas time at the earliest, or starting of the new year at the absolute latest. And this is just counting what we see on the page. Clearly there are just normal days where nothing extraordinary happens, much like the daily life chapter segments themselves. So there's even more unaccounted days that we don't see. We just counted the days shown and it was this much. I knew it was going to be big, but I wasn't expecting this big. Anyway, that was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed me going through the series as much as I did. Let me know in the comments if your guess came even close to the numbers that I came up with. Which chapter surprised you the most on how many dates it took place? And let me know what other theory topics I could cover in an upcoming Break Week video. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next theory video.